From CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. While a lot of attention has been paid to the devastating impact of President Trump's so-called Big Beautiful Bill, including the cuts to Medicaid and food assistance programs, it will also pump more than $80 billion into ICE, allowing the agency to double in size. ICE will now become the dominant law enforcement agency in the country. It is also becoming the most controversial and the most vilified. The specter of masked ICE agents jumping out of vehicles and rounding up brown people in farm fields and construction sites and hotels and restaurants, or dragging them away when they show up for their immigration hearings, or handcuffing them when they go to an emergency room with a sick child is a deliberate effort to create fear. But is it making us safer? This week I spoke to John Sandweg, who was the acting ICE director in the Obama administration.
The first thing, I think we have to put this in perspective. The administration has put ICE under tremendous pressure. This quota that they have to make roughly 3,000 arrests a day requires ICE, given the current resource laydown of the agency, it requires them to really shift their operational tactics in order to come close to meeting that goal. And what that really means is that you go away from these more surgical targeted operations where you're looking for people with a criminal history to where you're looking for places where you can make a large number of arrests at once. So that's why you're seeing all these worksite operations where they're hitting farms or factories or Home Depot parking lots. The reason they want to go do that work is because that's where kind of a relatively small number of agents can make a large number of arrests in one fell swoop, right? The challenge with that, though, is that I do have some concerns with that. One is when you shift to those kind of operations, you're just far less likely to find criminals. Criminals generally aren't working those hourly wage jobs. It's going to be a more random happenstance whether you find someone when you do that who has a criminal history. Conversely, the kind of tactics they were using at the beginning of the administration were really scrubbing criminal history records, looking for those individuals who were deportable, and they had a criminal history, and then going out surgically, right, looking for those specific individuals. So I think one would be the biggest concern you have is what types of individuals are now not being hunted down while the agents are busy doing these operations, right? While you're pulling the agents away from those more surgical operations focused on the criminal population, it makes, in a way, it makes it a little easier for those criminals to remain in the country because you got your agents tied up doing these kind of mass worksite operations, getting these large number of arrests. I think secondly, though, is there's been a blowback, obviously, Jim, too, to what ICE is doing. And as a result of that, this kind of culture has developed where the agents feel compelled to wear masks. And I am the first to say we got to protect the safety of the officers. When you work at DHS, when you work at ICE, that is the most important thing, is protecting the safety of your workforce. The problem, though, is that, it leads to, there are all sorts of risks operationally when you're wearing these masks. You can create confusion out there in the streets. People aren't entirely sure if these are ICE officers or if they're witnessing a kidnapping. You might see local police step in to try to intervene, to help people. You might see Good Samaritans who are armed, trying to, think they're witnessing some sort of assault on somebody and stepping in to protect that individual. No good comes from that. But of course, I would like to see a minimization of the wearing of masks. My sense is it's gone too far. But of course, reputationally, it kind of reinforces this image that this is a rogue agency that's out there, sweeping up people, without any accountability. And I think that, generally speaking for the agency itself, that's a problem.
I mean, you touched on it, the perception of it being a rogue agency. It's also become the most vilified agency, I think, in federal law enforcement now. I mean, we've seen these, when you look at these scenes of people just sort of confronting ICE agents, yelling, screaming at them, calling them Nazis and all the rest. I'm curious from the standpoint of those ICE agents, what that does to them, and whether, and the idea of just simply saying, I'm just here doing my job, that only goes so far.
Yeah, you're right, Jim. And the men and women at ICE, and having worked with them for years, I will tell you this, the vast majority of them signed up to make this country safer. They want to get bad guys off the streets. Unfortunately, a lot of, because of the administration's mass deportation plans, a lot of them have been diverted to these operations that really don't have that impact on public safety. But you're right, they're also devastating for the reputation of the agency. And now you got to understand, Jim, that hurts the agency in a couple of ways. First of all, half of ICE is traditionally a criminal investigative agency working on drug cartels, money laundering operations, child exploitation, saving kids, who are being trafficked or otherwise, exploited with child pornography, cases like that. When they work those cases, they work collaboratively with their state and local partners. Unfortunately, because the agency is now being vilified like it is because of the work and the kind of operations that the administration has forced them to undertake, it really makes it hard for them to collaborate with state and locals. It just severs that entirely, and the ability of the agency to get those transnational gang members or save kids from exploitation is really diminished as a result of it. But you're right as well. There are these larger reputational issues that all of this creates that's going to take the agency decades to recover from and is devastating for morale. And Jim, look, at the end of the day, even with this mass deportation effort, there's a simple reality at ICE, which is that the agency only has the capacity to really deport 400,000 to 500,000 people a year at most, and that's generous. Now, with everything that this administration is doing, let's up that to 700,000 or 800,000. The bottom line is we have 12 million people in this country who are undocumented, millions more who maybe crossed the border in recent years who are in immigration court proceedings, plus people who are legally present who get convicted of a crime and become deportable as well. The point is that the ICE's capacity to arrest is a fraction of the undocumented population. And a lot of the men and women at ICE recognize that. And what they believe is we should focus first on the worst. Let's get the worst first. Let's get those serious criminals off the streets first. Then we can pivot, to the larger population. Unfortunately, things are working backwards right now. We got the agency pulling agents away from criminal investigations, pulling agents away from those child exploitation cases, and saying your top priority is to get large numbers of arrests in the Home Depot parking lot. When you do that, you're diminishing public safety. And like I said, recognizing that the agency really does have limited resources, you're saying you're basically prioritizing those non-criminal populations before you get those bad guys.
But I think part of the strategy that the White House has, I'm not saying that on the street ICE agents necessarily have this policy. I think it's Tom Homan's policy. I think it's Stephen Miller's policy, is to create fear, to terrorize communities in the hopes of getting people to flee, to go deeper into the shadows, or to self-deport, as they like to phrase it. So in a way, I see ICE as being used as an instrument of terror to create that fear, to try to get rid of people through that means, as well as physically actually rounding them up. Do you disagree?
Yeah, I don't want to say it's becoming an agency of terror, but I absolutely think, and I don't think the administration would, tell you this is a secret, right? I think they're pretty open about it. Absolutely. I do think that part of the strategy is to create fear and uncertainty in the immigrant population in order to drive self-deportations. Look, Stephen Miller and Tom understand that ICE's resources are limited and that they can't deport all 12 million people in 4 years. It's impossible. So I think you're right. I think a lot of the strategy here of the administration is a self-deportation strategy to put the immigrant communities under tremendous pressure in order to encourage people to drive them home. Part of that is creating a sense that you're not safe wherever you go, whether that's your work site, lifting the sensitive location policy that restricted ICE agents from doing operations in churches or hospitals. All of that, I could not agree with you more. Even these detention facilities like Alligator or Alcatraz, where there, or deportations in El Salvador, all of that is designed to encourage people to self-deport in recognition of the fact that ICE doesn't have the resources to deport everyone who's in this country.
Well, you talk about resources. The bill that the Senate and the House just passed, that the president signed, makes ICE now the largest, or will make ICE the largest law enforcement agency in the United States. Should ICE really be the prominent, overwhelming law enforcement agency in the United States?
First of all, I'd say that ICE probably won't be the largest. It is a fundamental change. It is going to build an immigration enforcement apparatus like we have never seen in this country. It is going to increase detention beds, more than double the available detention space for ICE. It's going to more than double the number of agents. I think that technically it'll still probably be a little bit smaller than the FBI, and certainly ICE's sister agency, Customs and Border Protection, will be bigger. But put that aside, I agree with you. I think all of this mass deportation raises a fundamental question about what are the greatest priorities within the United States from a public safety perspective. This administration has said immigration enforcement is a priority. certainly, if you ask me, I think that the other priorities that ICE has historically emphasized, which are being decreased, those child exploitation cases or the money laundering cases or the war against the cartels that are, importing fentanyl into the United States. Those absolutely, in my mind, should be a priority. And Jim, with all this immigration, right, there's a kind of a tension between the quality of your arrests, how, you can sink thousands or hundreds of hours of agent hours into getting one transnational gang member off the street, where during that same time, you can make 150 arrests of just farm workers who are looking to, support their family and not committing crimes. I absolutely believe that it is a much better investment to invest that time to get that really dangerous guy who hides, who's hard to find, that requires a lot of agents doing a lot of sophisticated work to find, than it is to get those farm workers. This administration has chosen the opposite. I think the American public is going to have to make a decision at some point, but you're right. We are now, with these investments, building an apparatus we have never seen before. And one thing I'll tell you, Jim, is two things quickly. One is that this new ICE is going to be something that outlives the Trump administration. The future presidents are going to have to figure out what do they want to do with the ICE that is now, 30,000 agents roughly, and 100,000 beds deep. It is going to be a very interesting question. And I don't think that was accidental. I think the administration knew that they were implementing a longer term vision where immigration enforcement becomes a much bigger priority for the United States than it's ever been.
Do you worry at all, as ICE now ramps up the hiring of agents, as to the quality and the type of person who is signing up to join ICE at this time? Again, I go back to looking at these videos that I see, and that doesn't seem appealing to me. When I look at the confrontations, the folks wearing masks, grabbing people the way they are, the confrontations in the streets, that doesn't seem like a job that screams out, I want to do that, unless I have a particular mindset that on the dark side, on the positive side, yes, I want to help my country, I want to make it safe. On the dark side, I want a piece of that. I want to go in there into these communities and show them what's what, because this is the real America. I'm worried about the type of person who is going to now sign up to be an ICE agent going forward. Is that
Jim, I'm worried as well. I think there's no secret the administration is going to want to push these assets out on the street as quickly as possible. It is not going to be so easy for them. Let's say hiring. So you're going to hire 10,000 new agents. You need to recruit those agents. You need to vet them. And ICE has internal standards. You typically will do background checks, interview friends and families, make sure somebody is suitable enough to take the position, that they're getting into it for the right reasons. Then you send them down to an academy and train them, and then they get into the field and have additional training in the field. The point is that I think this administration is going to be tempted to cut corners. They're going to want to get those agents out on the street as quickly as possible. In the normal course, if you don't lower your standards, it is going to be at least 2 years before you see 10,000 additional agents out there, probably more likely 3 or 4 years. And Jim, really fast, there's a parallel to this. At the tail end of the Bush administration, they really ramped up the Border Patrol. And in the years after, and the administration really accelerated that hiring. And a lot of people argued they cut corners and lowered their internal vetting and background check standards in order to get those agents online and get them down to the border. In the ensuing years, there was a real struggle at CBP with corruption cases and use of force issues. People, violating policy by using excessive force and or taking bribes to, facilitate illicit cross-border traffic. The point is that there was a sense amongst a lot of groups and a lot of, government watchdogs that the lowering of the bar created all these problems in the next 3, 4, 5 years. Absolutely, I think there's serious concerns here. At ICE, we want to make sure that people are getting into this for the right reason, because they want to help their country and they want to help make their country a little safer. I do worry that in the political environment we're in, that if you lower those standards, you might get people who are getting into it for the wrong reasons. And I will just say quickly, ICE historically is very good at internally vetting those candidates, making sure that we're getting the people who are getting into it for the right reasons. But under this, they're going to be under tremendous pressure to hire. And I think it's just critical that they not lower those standards as a result of it and not diminish all the safeguards that are in place to ensure that you're getting the best and the brightest in these positions.
When we come back, Congressman Jared Moskowitz, as we talk about why the Epstein case is burning like a fire through MAGA world. Stay with us.